David, thank you for having us.
Yeah, good to see you both. I know we were just chatting before that you mentioned you actually have been attendees for some of these conversations in the past. So how awesome is it to have you both now up and sharing your wisdom with the group? I'm excited.
Oh yeah, I'm so excited. I love all of these sessions and I'm really excited to talk to everyone here.
Excellent. Love it. Well, I'd love to just start briefly if each of you wanted to share a quick background on yourself, anything that you think folks might find interesting from this group. Joyce, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Joyce. I'm a director of engineering at Shift. I lead the team that focuses on our internal tools, so our operations side of the business, the tools we provide there, our iOS team, and as well as our seller customer team. My team is about 20 people right now, yeah, excited to be here.
Excellent. And Bhavin?
Hey everyone, my name is Bhavin. I work at Twilio. For all those who don't know about Twilio, it's a cloud communications company building products to help our customers engage better with their customers across many channels via power of API. I lead teams across North America and Europe, building distributed systems, low latency, high throughput types. Recently, for an example, we launched event streams in our, public event. But title-wise, I'm a director of engineering, but my primary responsibility is basically helping engineering leaders increase engagement and execution in their teams. Personally, I love cooking for my family and friends. I love jumping rope and traveling when I can.
Nice. Well, we were also saying before, right? Since everybody's like in their homes, right? If we have children or dogs running around or doorbells ringing or whatever, no one will judge because I'm sure that's happening to audience members as well. So I'd love to actually just dive in with the first question for both of you. Before I do that, though, I want to let folks know you can always ask your own questions, and we encourage that because those are the questions I like to ask and then answer. So in the Q&A tab on the top of your screen next to your chat, if you click on that, you can ask questions and you can upvote other people's questions. So feel free to do that at any time. I'm generally going to go in order of the Q&A upvotes, unless there's something that's like crazy sensitive or weird or whatever, which is very, very rare. And we actually already have one that has 6 upvotes. So I'll ask that second. I'll start with a kind of a little bit of a layup question first, which is, this general conversation is going to be about, going from engineering manager to engineering director. We probably have folks that are, maybe they've been an engineering manager for a while and maybe they feel like they're ready for being a director, maybe, and then from director to VP, thinking about that transition, what that looked like. And it may be new for folks, it may be familiar with folks, but that career ladder and career journey, that conversation is what, we're gonna be focusing on. So maybe if just each of you want to share a little bit about your experiences thus far in going up that career ladder, that career journey, and maybe if you think of like, what's been most surprising or unusual or unexpected about that, and what have you expected? What's kind of gone your way? So it's kind of an open-ended question, but Bhavin, why don't we start with you if you have any reflections, and then Joyce.
Yeah, I can go first. So growing up the career ladder, I think a lot of it, what I've learned over time is basically the ownership that we take. In general, there's, most companies will have some sort of career ladder, some sort of jobs, roles, and responsibilities that they define. But a lot of the times it boils down to us on what are actually we gonna do about that. How does that translate into what do we expect from the role, what our managers expect, and literally laying out a plan to work towards it. So I've experienced that in general, having a plan really helps, and understanding that role really, in detail is also very helpful. So, talk to people who are doing that role well, talk to your manager. I think that those are some of the things that I've learned have really helped me. But in general, have a plan that you and your manager really align on. This is the way to go.
It definitely makes sense that, particularly in the just career paths, when you don't have a vision or aspiration, or you had thought process behind how you're going to go about it, sometimes the needs of the organization start driving your path, right? And if you're not rowing your own boat, then the water pushes you, in the organization. So that makes a lot of sense. What are your thoughts, Joyce?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on this, so I'm going to try and condense it. I'm sure we have enough time to talk about it a little bit more, but I would say, like, I agree. I think that that, like you said, there is a lot of like external factors that kind of control that. Of like, your move from getting to manager to a director. And I agree with Bob in that having a plan is good. Having an idea of what your ideal situation would be like great, just to like have as like a North Star, but don't be super tied to it. Like maybe just before me, but I've always worked at startups, and startups are known for being chaotic. And so you like, no matter how you plan it and no matter how you imagine it happening, expect that things can go a little bit differently, and be open to those opportunities, and like be able to focus on the things that matter to you. And then when you see those opportunities, maybe in like a different outfit, then you can at least like jump on it and then make it into like the perfect kind of ideal situation that you had in mind, because you have that impact, like Bobbin said, like you have that that authority, and it's kind of like you and your manager's responsibility to problem solve that together. So I would say that's the biggest thing that I would kind of call out, that it kind of comes in all shapes and sizes, and don't limit yourself to like a specific like ladder, right? There's a lot of conversation about ladders being like a little bit more old school. It's more kind of like I think people call it like a net. So like, there's different paths, there's different ways. You could go sideways, you could go even backwards, but like it's all kind of like interconnected.
And you can get caught in it and not be able to escape.
Exactly.
Fascinating. So it's like hearing from Bobbin's side, kind of this idea that you got to plan. But in addition, Joyce, you're kind of saying, in addition, be open to the opportunities that may be in front of you, right? So it's like having a direction, but having openness, so that even if you have a plan, sometimes the way that you might achieve your ultimate aspirations might have a very unusual path. Last week, we're actually talking kind of on the product side. There's a lot of thought that, if you're working on an interesting, highly visible product or service at your organization, that will somehow like make you more visible and like be promoted more easily, et cetera. And I think that was a myth that we were kind of dispelling there, that like, regardless of what you get assigned to, if you work hard, and you do great work, typically people will notice. And if people aren't noticing, whether that be because of, issues that are in your control or issues beyond your control, maybe issues related to diversity and inclusion or issues related to bias, if folks aren't putting in the energy and effort to notice, right, and you've done your best, then sometimes it makes sense to look elsewhere.
Yeah, that's right. I was actually talking to someone about this the other day. Someone asked me the question of, like, what if those roles are all taken, right? Like, what if, and like no one, this person in particular wasn't asking about the director role, but more about like going to the manager role. But I still think this applies because I've gotten this question elsewhere too. That if those roles are not available in your company, don't limit your thinking to just that company. And I don't mean you should leave. I'm saying that, like, imagine what you would do in that role and see if there are opportunities to grow those skills in the position that you have currently and the organization that you're in currently. And that can be a very proactive conversation with your manager. Your manager should absolutely know that, like, hey, like, you want to do this eventually in the future. And so it's not just okay, like, this is my first step and then the next step I have to take here. Like, think broadly about it and like really focus on like, what does it mean to be a director? Like, what's the kind of work you'll be doing as a director? And focus on that. It's kind of like what David said, like, if you're doing good work, then those opportunities will always come to you, whether it be at your current organization or somewhere else.
Bowman, does that resonate with you?
That absolutely resonates with me. It reminds me of a conversation that I had with a senior VP in one of the organizations that I've been. And I was talking to him about career growth in general, and he mentioned, like, oh, and tell me, why do you think people get promoted? And they do hard work and they do all these things, and I was just basically making that up. And he was like, it's all wrong. People get responsibilities, and they get responsibilities because people trust them with responsibilities. So you have to build trust. And it's sort of ironical that, I have a lot of things. If I'm doing all those things well, somebody will go, oh, let's give this to, Joyce, and she's doing all the other things she's really well. So, you sort of kind of attract opportunities that way if you're doing the things you're doing well, really well. So that opened my eyes to, like, it's not about, the quantity of the work. It's really about the quality of the work you produce. And I was also, in a place where, oh, I'll do this, I'll do that, to just, again, increase my area so that I can say I do a lot of hard work. But absolutely, it boils down to the work that you are doing. Just do that well and put effort in it, make sure it's a high impact work. It's worth doing, obviously, but what Joyce says absolutely resonate. What she said was also earlier resonate to reiterate the plan as business changes. So, that's also very, very true, Joyce.
I love it. You brought up the big T word, which is a really important word, and particularly as you go up the career ladder, trust, right? I was actually having a conversation with a mentee on Plato, not a plug, but this past Monday, and he was mentioning a book that he was reading. I don't know the name of the book, so if y'all read it, feel free to post it in the chat. But it's talking about how, in organizations, there are really kind of three resources. Most folks talk about two, which is kind of time and money, budget, but that there's a third resource, which is trust, and that resource is really the resource that you most start to need to rely on and gain and obtain as you go up the career ladder, because it's like the less trust you have, the less folks will trust you and your team, and the less impact that you can have. And making a difference is a lot about impact. So I know we could talk about that for a while, but I want to dive into the questions folks are asking so we can start getting through these. So this first question is from Daniel, and again, either of you can answer it. What are the top 2 or 3 skills that you remember having to develop that you didn't use often as a first-line engineering manager?
I can go first. So the top thing that comes to my mind is business writing skills. That is something that I didn't really think when I was a first-line EM that it would be so important. But it's kind of also true that as I've grown into these other roles, personally, I'm coding less, but I am actually reading a lot of documents that are business oriented, and I am writing a lot of things that are going to impact the shape or direction of what we're going to do as an engineering team or systems and things like that. So writing at an altitude that is going to take VP level people and it's worthy of their time in a condensed manner. Still, you're going to able to put all the things that you want to put in a piece of paper. I think that's a skill that I didn't really have. I took some courses on it in the end to educate myself, but that was one of the skills.
I absolutely love that you mentioned that one. I'm reminded when folks are used to conversing with their direct manager, they usually, hopefully, get their time and attention. And so it's okay if they are fairly detailed and they go into a lot of, depth. And, when it comes to making the right decisions, as a senior engineer, you want to have your detailed design doc showing that you've thought through everything. But then as you're kind of alluding to, the higher up the ladder you go, the busier people are, the less time people have. And so, I think one of the most valuable parts of writing that I learned was very similar to what you described is, the executive summary, being able to really, really, really simplify your writing. And sometimes, if you're looking at an email or even a Slack message, reviewing it 2 or 3 or 4 times. And I don't know, the closest analogy I have is, Chanel says, before you leave the house, take off one accessory. It's before you send that email, maybe take off 1 sentence is a way to think about sending mail to managers. Joyce, does that resonate? Do you have any other skills that you think were really relevant in that next step?
Yeah, totally. I think that's a great one. Especially the executive summary. I think a lot of times when you are just the line manager, you are mostly responsible for communicating to your direct manager rather than to the executive team. And so being really effective in terms of like, what are the details that your audience needs, like in a short and concise, like clear manner. I think that's definitely a skill. The other ones that I was thinking about too is kind of similar, but like the ability to like to have that influence on the wider group. And I think that falls into the same category of communication. And like really being able to be a little bit more focused on it because you get busier too. And so like being able to carve out enough time to focus on that and prioritize that against everything else that's on your plate. And so I think like being able to have those conversations with the other kind of stakeholders in a way that doesn't have to require you to have one-on-ones all the time because that's just too much time. So that sort of communication, like the broader communication, the being able to like problem solve with them and bring them along, because a lot of times at this level, I feel like you set a lot of the strategy rather than waiting for the strategy. And so being able to have those conversations collaboratively and also to drive those together, I think is very important. And I didn't think about that as much when I was an engineering manager. And then the other thing too is like learning through people on your team. Like, so for instance, like iOS, I'm not an iOS developer. I'm not an iOS expert, but I lead the iOS team, right? And so being able to learn from like our iOS tech lead and other teammates there, like being able to learn enough so that I can do my job effectively, but not have to be the expert. And like, that means that learning through ways that are different than the way I used to learn as an eng manager, because as an eng manager, I would learn by like digging into the code and like doing it all myself. And like, you know, like I don't have time for that right now. And that's not the best use of my time for my team. And so that was a skill that I had to learn. And I'm still learning, to be honest. So yeah, those are the two that stand out to me.
That's excellent. And ties into trust again, right? Like needing to be able to trust your team. And if you find that you're, as a director, you're constantly going in and inspecting code, maybe that's revealing of a greater trust issue, you know, that you need to look at, right? Either that there's something where maybe you should be considering, you know, looking into the folks that are on your team, or you should be looking inward and going, why am I having a hard time trusting people? Maybe you need to check in with a therapist. Who knows? You know, different for everyone. We all, whether we like it or not, we all bring our whole selves to work, and the reasons why we may trust easily or not trust easily, whether we like it or not, sometimes relate to work and sometimes don't. So whatever those issues are, the point is that you have to find a way to both have trust and earn trust. And what you're both alluding to is forms of communication. That communication becomes more important. So I love that. I'm going to go into this next question here from Rowan. In your experience, what are some common mistakes that new directors make after transitioning into the role?
Oh, I'll start with this one. Assuming that you have all authority. Just because you were given the title doesn't mean that you can just be like, hey, do this and do it this way. And like, this is how I want it done, kind of thing. And like, I think like maybe on some level, engineering managers also can fall into the same pitfalls. But I think that is a surefire way of losing trust, once again, of your team and also peers. Like I said, this is a role where there's a lot of like influencing involved. And that comes from earning that trust. Now I'm like anchoring on trust all the time, David. You have it like imprinted in my head now. But yeah, like I think that like it's a common mistake that like just because you're put in charge of this team, that like you assume like a directive role where you're extremely authoritative. I think in some ways like you have to provide structure and you have to provide some kind of like leadership, but especially if you're working with a wider scope. I think that like there's a lot more work involved in earning that trust and building out the structure that suits the team rather than like just you, right? And so that comes through like education, that comes through like working with the team, that comes through like, you know, like we were just saying, like iterating, right? And so I would say that's the most common, that like just because you get into this role, it doesn't mean like you could do it in whatever way you want to. Like it has to suit the team and it has to suit the organization. And those cracks will like like definitely show over time if you continue down that path.
I think it's a common it's a common and understandable mistake that we make when we are a first line manager, right? That all day long for however many years that we've been an engineer, the way we got things done was moving all the pieces in the puzzle and constructing things, and of course, typically you'll work with other people, but it's like you can move all the pieces of this puzzle yourself. And now, like, it's kind of like when you become a manager and you try and do that, now you're like moving physical people, and the people are like, don't move me. And instead it's like you have to play a game of chess with your arms behind your back or something, that you have to do it through communication. And then even more so, it's like being blindfolded when you're a director, right? You have to like trust everything. You can't be in the code. Bhavin, I'm curious, does that resonate with you? But also if you've seen any other mistakes or pitfalls either that you've made or that you've seen others make in going up the ladder.
Yeah, I've made plenty of mistakes. So I think completely resonate with Joyce, right? I think the director role, I think it's different with different companies because they're all different sizes. The way I see it is it's a partnership role. You're not directing anything alone, like period. And you get to experience some of that in manager role, but you still have your team. You're focused on one area most likely. And with director, I think the problem space are likely going to be large enough that you're not going to be able to solve alone by just with your team. You might have to work with your counterparts really more, sometimes to influence their work, sometimes to come to a common ground, create win-win situations. So not having enough relationship built in a way so that you can have enough, provide candid feedback or help each other, I think it will not set up either your team or yourself for success. So that I think I won't speak too much on that. The other thing I feel is, going from any role and trying to change things immediately is also, I feel, is not a wise sign. I mean, in general, sometimes you have to read and understand the lay of the land, what it is, and sort of understand like what is happening, what are the good things, the bad things, and what do you actually want to change, and how does that fit? So I think understanding the role before doing anything and how are you going to play your part is very key. And I think it's important, and a lot of people make mistakes after transitioning into a new role in that area.
Yeah, and I mean, I think folks know when they see somebody coming into either a new role or even from outside the company, like just a new employee, that the folks that you see that are asking a lot of questions and that are listening and that are trying to understand before they start making recommendations, those are the ones that, you go, oh, wow, this person is taking things in and trying to make an informed decision. It's kind of part of what you're alluding to in my mind is that sort of thing of taking things in, before you're just going in and kind of like, here's my plan and my vision, right? That you're taking things in, that's healthy.
You sort of have to fight it. I mean, I can understand. I've been in that situation where I got into this new role, like, hey, I've struggled with these areas. I want to provide structure and support in these areas, which I think are lacking. And you go after it, hard and strong, and that's very good. But in general, I think I always come back to like, who cares? Right? The problem you're solving is it worth solving? Just make sure your partners are aligned, and again, listen in and take some time before you make any of those changes per se. So that's the mistake that I have made. That's the mistake I've seen other people make. So
it makes sense. Well, like it's like when you're, I'm not a parent, but I know plenty of folks on this call are parents, right? And sometimes folks go into parenting, they go, I'm gonna be different than this one or two parents that did things in a way that didn't work for me, and you kind of just take your style and like run with it, right? And I can't speak much to whether that works or not as a parent, but I can say that happens all the time for engineering managers or just management in general, right? You have a manager that worked really well for you that you want to emulate, or a manager who did something that did not work well for you that you don't want to emulate. And the challenge is kind of everyone's different. Not everybody is like you, and not everybody is motivated in the same ways, right? Like being part of a praise-driven organization or a fear-driven organization, some people resonate with one way or another, and one type of manager or another. And so it's like you have to like read and take in your environment to kind of know where to proceed or how to proceed. I'm going to move on to the next question here. So this one from Israel. Working at a small company with very little middle management, what are some good ways to develop director type skills as an engineering manager that will be attractive when applying to larger organizations? Now, I know, Joyce, you mentioned that you've kind of been a lot in startup world, so I imagine you've got some sort of experience with this kind of thing. Do you have any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, definitely. So I would say things that are like more like focused on the wider organization, like impacting change on the wider organization. If you could talk to specific examples of, driving change there and then seeing it to a successful like launch and adoption with the rest of the team, I think that's a really good way to start, because then those experiences can be relevant in these roles. Like I think in a lot of roles, and I'd be curious to hear about Pavan too, but like when we're interviewing, we love seeing like that proactive kind of approach of identifying a problem, rallying people behind it, and then being able to execute on a solution, right? And so I would say like those kind of are the two things that I feel like I would focus on. And I think that like there are a lot of opportunities, especially I think the question mentioned very little middle management, that signals to me that there's probably a lot of opportunity for like, impacting the organization, because if there's very little middle management, then like they have a lot on their plate, right? They're managing a wider team. And so they may not be able to have the opportunity to think more strategically and like widely across the organization, right? And so if you have space to do that thinking, then engage those managers, right? Like, hey, I'm hearing from the team that like our product requirements aren't clear, or something like that, right? And use specific examples of where you're hearing this, and like engage with them on like, how can we change this? And then be proactive, just say like, I think this is important, I'd love to like drive this, right? And so then through that experience, I think you can both show your proactive like tendencies, and also like the experience that you'll get in terms of like driving larger change, thinking more strategically and thinking across the organization, even if it's not like directly impacting just you and your like your code or like your projects or things like that. And so I would say that like I would start there. I think that would be really helpful, and getting that experience, and then also starting that thinking, because that's also something that like you want to start practicing, because that's what you'll do a lot of in this role.
What I'm hearing is that people like to hire problem solvers, and a problem solver, regardless of your organization structure, right? That and you're solving problems via interactions with people, right? That impact is something that people will notice and that people will value, which I think makes total sense.
Yeah, and can I say one thing about problem solving? So like, I think we as engineers, we're all problem solvers, right? We love solving problems. We love identifying problems. I would say that like in this role, one thing that I've noticed is that there's more of a focus from identifying a solution to identifying the problem. Like I think as an engineer, like your main focus is around fix this problem. Like how do we build this thing, right? But I think in the management route, you start to shift your focus on identifying the problem with a group of people, because I think that like that is what helps alignment, is once you all agree on like, this is the problem that we want to solve and this is the actual root cause, then I think that's what drives a lot of the alignment, rather than this is how we should build this one thing. And so yeah, I just like my experience, I think that like shifting that focus was kind of unintentional, but now that I look back, it makes a lot of sense to me. And so like, as you're thinking about like, how can I do more of that kind of thinking? Just like, you'll see these opportunities in your world as well. But that's just something that I wanted to kind of call out, because I think it's great that we're all problem solvers, and we will continue to be. But I think that where you focus shifts a little bit when you go into management.
That idea of illuminating what the problems actually are you solving the right problems as opposed to diving into solution? Again, kind of related to what Bhavin was saying earlier about like kind of listening and observing your environment a little bit, like not just being like, I'm going to do X, Y, Z, but like looking around, perception, like that's huge. And particularly, as your job becomes more about trust and communication, the more senior you get, the things that are more about human psychology start to matter more, right? Like the elephants in the room. I write a lot of articles on this topic, like Google them. But there are so many elephants in the room at organizations that nobody services or brings up that can actually be causing a lot of the problems that, if you're purely technical and you're just focusing on the tech, you won't catch them. For example, you have an engineer that's not productive, maybe the most straightforward thing to do is to just kind of go in and like crack the whip, if you will. But sometimes they're not productive because they had a tragedy in the family, or they really don't like what they're working on, and the solution may be to move them or to give them, time off, or you have to identify those types of things to really know what is the actual problem. And to do that, you have to have trust from the team, right? So it goes back to trust. Bhavin, you have reflections on all this?
Yeah, I have a reflection that you're very skilled at bringing up the T word again and again.
That's fair.
No, yeah, I mean, Joyce highlighted pretty much most of what I had thought. So my first role as a director was in a startup, and that team or company grew from 50, 60 people to 200, 300 people when I left. And I think in any growing company, if you're there are always going to be more problems than there are problem solvers or people effectively solving them. So opportunities are abundant. One advantage that I think a startup provides is you are much more closer to an executive, so whether it's CTO, CEO, whoever, than you are on the larger companies. You have a little bit more hierarchy, and that for information you have filter and delay. So you can actually work on skills on like working with your senior executives. What are they actually trying to solve, and then work on building like solving larger problems within your organization or area of control. You also have opportunities such as leveling up the startup. Like I've been in startups. Sometimes we have to do the shortcut ways to survive, and that's fair. But like in long term, like how do we bring up the excellence in the engineering organization, assuming that's an engineering organization? How do we bring up industry practices? For example, I worked with our SVP at the time to bring up more agile workflow in startup, which were loosely followed. And that I think was valuable when I applied in elsewhere. And of course the problems you can solve are, talk about the outcome, talk about the impact to a larger company when you're interviewing. I think that goes a long way as well.
That's excellent. So we got about 20 minutes left. So I'm going to do a little bit more of a not lightning round per se, but I'm just going to do like one question to one of you, one question to the other, and see if we can get through kind of as many as we can. This question from Wesley is, and I'll pose this one to you, Bhavin, and then we'll go to you, Joyce. And if you want to add, totally fine. Like you can, if you're like, I really want to mention something, that's totally fine. Okay, so Wesley asks, roughly, what did you find a tougher transition and why, going from engineer to engineering manager, or going from engineering manager to director? Bhavin.
The engineering manager to director, I feel, was a more tougher transition. And recency bias could play here, I don't know. But the reason I feel that way is when you're an engineer and you get into an engineering manager position, you are more likely to already be performing at a lead level. Like, for example, your other engineers might even look up to you. Your manager may look up to you, and you're sort of, without even a title, you're sort of performing in the lead role. And with the manager, you may get people responsibilities at a whole different level. But I think that's a little bit more easier to, I don't have the right word, but like to get into, I feel. Like I mentioned earlier, engineering manager director is a lot more partnership role. Your manager's help is necessary, but not sufficient. You have to have a lot of stakeholders input in, and you need to, again, work with other people. So relationship building, communication skills are difficult to learn in my experience rather than technical skills. I can feel if I spend 2 weeks on some technology, I can get a pretty good handle, at least understand it. People are different and the way they communicate are different. So it takes longer time to learn and execute and all that stuff. So I feel that's a little bit more tougher transition.
It reminds me of an audience member asked once about if introverts are capable of being, directors and above, and I was like, raise your hand if you're an introvert, and actually most of the folks raised their hand on the panel. And the point is these are skills. You got to learn them, you got to practice them, but they are skills. Communication is a skill, earning trust is a skill, and there's books on it, there's science on it, etc. Joyce, this question from Sherwin: how has your conception of who your team is, how has that changed? As a first-line engineering manager, we frequently think of our teams as our individual contributors. How does that sense change as you lead a larger organization?
Ooh, that's a great question. Obviously, you have people who are directly kind of reporting into you, whether that be through like another manager or like, an IC, like principal engineer or something like that. And so like there is that idea of a team too. So like that's a lot of like what you would think about for career development, and like making sure that you're kind of on the ball with that, because like I feel like that's an easy one to slip. But I think that when you think about your work and like the area that you want to impact, it includes a lot more people than just the people who report into you. Like I work very closely with our design and product teams. And that's not just through like the projects that we're working on, but also just like thinking about like future planning, right? Like problem solving at that level. And like in our business, we have a big operational component of the business. And so those stakeholders, like the kind of partners that you want to work with there, like I think of them as like part of the team, because for instance, like whenever we have like planning meetings, talking about like quarterly planning or things like that, like there's always like our head of biz ops or like our head of sales, like those people are in the room just as much as like my engineering managers are. And so I think that's a really great question. Like the team, there's like different kind of like focuses of teams. So there's like one team that I focus on for like the people management stuff. And then there's like the team in terms of like, we're doing work together. We're doing these projects together. And this is how we're gonna like solve these problems together.
Makes sense. This question is from Jimmy Bovin. How do you manage your time as an engineering director, and what are your priorities?
That's a really good question. I wish I could answer that very straightforwardly. I think thinking about how I manage my time, first of all, I think what I've learned, my time is always available. I make myself always available to my immediate team. So in terms of, the company priorities are get transferred in some way to you and to your areas of responsibility. So you need to make sure those are in line. But without going into very specifics, I think my number one priority is always like helping my engineering leaders increase execution and engagement. And if they're needing help in any of those areas, that's where I go to first. Second priority is again maintaining that harmonious relationship with my peers and partners, because again I mentioned that's a partnership role. So how are like my priorities? I won't be able to do it alone. I need my product organization, I need my PM organization, I need some other engineering teams and all those to work all collaboratively. So managing all that is usually my other priority. And of course there's coaching and all that stuff as well.
This next question, Joyce, is from Daniel. Assuming that moving into a director role involves the development of a lot of soft skills, which is a loaded word. I know a lot of folks that work in HR really hate that word because critical skills, call what you want. How do you make it clear to those in a position to promote you that you have those soft or critical skills?
Mm-hmm. So my approach to this is I'll have frequent conversations of the expectations that I need to meet there. So what I mean by that is that usually in organizations, there's like, there's role descriptions or leveling descriptions or things like that, right? And they're up to interpretation, right? And like they have to be a little bit more flexible for a reason. But one of the things that I do, and I used to do a lot more frequently too, is that we would go through those. We would look at the descriptions in your current level and then the descriptions in the next level. And I would sit down with my direct report and we'd go over them. Like we'd basically have some homework where the direct report had to highlight. Like it was like red, yellow, green. Green is like, I feel like very confident in this. I feel like I'm good here. I don't have like a ton more work to do here. Yellow is like, I'm working on this, but I feel good about it. Red is like, I'm not working on this, but, and this is an area where I need help. Like I want to improve in, right? And then we kind of go over it. And I think that what was helpful there is that like, it's kind of a calibration process with you and your manager to like make sure that you are interpreting these levels in the same way, right? Because a lot of times, you know, you could like, I've seen descriptions where it's like demonstrates leadership or something like that, right? And it's kind of like, okay, like yes, but like how, right? And so then in those discussions, those gaps show up. Either it could be like someone like highlighted something green and it's like, oh wait, I think there's more work that you need to do here. Or it's like it's highlighted red and it's like, well, I actually think that you're doing this pretty well. Right. And so being able to kind of calibrate with the expectations between you and your manager is a very like helpful process, especially when it comes to these like softer skills, because it is kind of up to interpretation. And I think that the next step beyond that was like, once you identify those gaps, once you identify like where you and your manager are kind of like off, then dig into the details, right? Like what are the examples of how you've demonstrated this that like maybe they didn't have visibility on, or like maybe they wanted to see a little bit different, and like maybe the conversation gets a little bit uncomfortable, but this is where you have to really dig in if you're feeling that misalignment, because it's so up to interpretation. So I would say like, yeah, maybe propose that to your manager, or like, you know, approach the conversation of like, hey, like I want to like debug this with you, you know, like something here doesn't feel right, and I want to get clarity. And so that's an exercise that has worked for me. Free to take it, like make it whatever you want, but I would say give that a try and make it like a problem-solving experience with your manager, and I think that they would really appreciate that.
It's so true. Having some kind of framework to look at so that you can, as objectively as possible, say, where do I stand with that framework, and talk out, as you're describing, the places where maybe there's a little bit of subjectivity, and kind of get as an objective of you as you can, so that you know exactly what you need to level up on. And then in addition, you can document, you know, the things that you've done and when you've used those specific skills. Not to plug, but that's a platform that I'm building. If you check out my startup, it's a platform to do exactly that. But but it's interesting because there are a lot of organizations, particularly startups, that don't have job descriptions, don't have a leveling framework, don't have like a set of skills to get from one level or another. And when you're in a position like that, you know, you were talking earlier about proactivity. What better way to do this than to say, hey, I noticed we don't have any kind of leveling framework, you know, here's what other startups use. And if folks want to know, you can go to a website, levels.fyi or progressions.fyi. There's some third-party resources where you can find leveling systems that big companies use. Check it out. But it's a really good call that once you have a framework, you know, then you can operate off of that framework. I'm going to move on to the next questions we go through. We got about 10 minutes. This next one's from Josh for you, Bhavin. In your opinion, how important is time and role when looking to go from engineering manager to director?
It's a good question. I was having a conversation around this very recently, and I think it's important. I think it's important, and how important I think it is. You have to figure out in your organization what people say. But I've felt that there's a lot of honestly, there's a lot of opinions about how much you have spent time and role before you're quote unquote ready to go to EM to director. And there's some validity in that, in my opinion. I think, you know, it requires you to build that trust, if you will, to see that you have performed long enough in a role, and then you're ready to move on. But so in my opinion, it is important. But my opinion is less important. It's important how your company perceives that, and what that is. But more important than that is what you have done that allows you to move on in the next level. Like, so again, focusing on impact or outcome. most likely is going to win when compared with time and role. If it's really head to head, but time and like you cannot discount time and role. Experience teaches a lot of things, and that's also valuable.
I'm reminded with this question of the Dunning-Kruger effect, right? Which is this, when you look at, of the set of people that believe that they know a lot about a particular topic, there's a very clear binomial distribution, if you will, of the people that they fit in two camps. Either they know so much about this topic that they know that they're good at it and they can kind of assess it. And the other side is the Dunning-Kruger effect, that you know so little about a topic that you can't even adequately assess your own ability and therefore think that you're good at it. And when I think about time on the job, when you jump on a job that you have no experience doing, and being a director is very different from being an engineering manager, as you both described, then you may think that you know what you're doing, but it may actually be because you lack the experience to assess your own ability that you might think that you're doing well and maybe not so. So I appreciate that you say the answer is yes, because I know there are some folks that want to be double promoted yesterday. This next question from Riley for Joyce: what kinds of goals do you set for yourself to grow from a frontline manager to a director beyond managing more individuals or teams?
Yeah, this is a really good question. I would say that I think, like, I hate to be a broken record, but I think like thinking about like problems that you can solve across the organization, like setting a goal around that, I think would be really helpful. So I'll tell you about like what I did. So I was working in a team where we had basically like 4 different teams focused on like a specific customer experience, right? And not only the customer experience, but like the kind of business metrics around that customer experience, right? And what I noticed was that each team was kind of doing their planning independently of one another, and I felt like there was an opportunity there, right? And so like I was kind of vocal about it with my boss, and I was just like, hey, like this doesn't make sense. Like, how can we do this better? And like at the same time, I would talk to the other teams, because I was eng manager of one of those 4 teams. And so I would talk to the managers of the other teams and the product managers of the other teams. And then like I would create those relationships and then just start like having meetings with them. Like I just put it on the calendar and I was like, okay, I just want to know, for the sake of my team's planning, like what are you guys doing, right? And then we eventually got into the habit of doing that regularly. And like everyone is kind of like, oh yeah, like we want to solve this problem, but I'm busy, or like, like I have to work on this other thing. And so if you have that energy and you also want to do it, then that shows, that shows by like you being proactive and you creating those relationships, right? And like, yes, there's like, I know some people are a little bit more cautious about, am I stepping on people's toes, right? And I would say if you're vocal about it, like if you're having these conversations with people and like identify those people who you think you might be stepping their toes on, and talk to them, like talk to them about like, hey, like I'm seeing this happen, like is there a way that I can help here, right? And so you can have those conversations very productively, and then that kind of creates momentum for other problems that might come up that are a little bit more wider than that. And so I would say like that was one of my examples of like opportunities that I found across the organization. But I'm sure at organizations that you guys are at, you will identify those too. Like there are opportunities always in growing teams and growing organizations. And so if there's anything that stands out to you as like, that sounds very fun, like I want to solve that, like make that known and just start doing it. Talk to the people that you would anyways if you're solving that problem. And kind of start from there. And so in terms of goals, like set a goal around that.
Excellent. Setting goals, problem solving, these are themes for a reason, right?
Totally.
So in our last few minutes, I'm going to open it up back to both of you for our last question or two. This one from Mohammed: do you sometimes think that being a director wasn't the right decision? Like maybe too much pressure or anything like that? Or if not for you, maybe you've seen that for someone else. Bhavin, let's start with you.
I do think that. So I'm not sure about like being director or anything. I don't necessarily tied to a title. I do have a vision for myself, and I want to be there, and director is part of that. So I don't necessarily debate that, but you have sometimes go in a place where you're facing too much pressure, or you're not getting enough help or direction. I think that's, in my opinion, when I reflect, it's usually because we are out of our comfort zone. That's okay. I was again getting mentorship with one of our senior VPs in the company, and he was like, it's a good thing to be outside your comfort zone for a lot of times. And if you're not, you're probably not growing. So, it's a personal thing. For me, I do feel that, hey, is it too much pressure, or am I in the right place at the right time, that kind of stuff. But like, I don't necessarily challenge myself like, hey, did I did the right thing by getting myself in this role, or things like that I feel is correct. But yeah, I can understand that it's very the middle management is hard.
Joyce, your thoughts?
My answer is absolutely. Like it gets tough for sure. And I think that like what I keep in mind is exactly what Bhavin said. You are constantly iterating, right? And I think that's something that I have to remind myself all the time too, is that sometimes like things just don't feel right. Like sometimes like what you're doing doesn't seem to be working, and like you want to like fix all these problems and you get kind of frustrated. There's absolutely moments where I feel like maybe I'm not cut out for this, right? And like that, I just say that to say like I don't think that means that you shouldn't be doing it. I think everyone kind of feels a level of like imposter syndrome that at various moments. And so yeah, like don't worry, it's tough. Like what we're doing is tough, and like I think you're allowed to kind of feel that. Don't beat yourself up about feeling that. But like like you'll get through it. You'll learn, like kind of what Bhavin said too. Like if you're not out of your comfort zone, you're not learning. And then you'll get to a place where like your comfort zone gets like bigger and bigger, and now you have like even bigger challenges that you have to like take on to continue growing, right? But yeah, absolutely.
That was well said, Joyce.
Yes,
Thanks.
very well said. Last question, and see if you can answer this in a sentence or two, which is going to be incredibly hard, but why not end with a fun moment? This one's from Zhenjiang. How do you proactively manage your own perceptions in the organization, especially if you have a unique value that the rest of the organization attunes to and may make false assumptions about your behaviors? As quickly as you can. How about Bhavin and then Joyce, and then we'll wrap it up.
Get feedback, don't complain, act on that feedback.
Excellent.
Great. Yeah, have conversations.
Excellent. Oh wow, you're both very, very fast. I love it. With that, we've hit our time. Thank you both. This was wonderful. So many illuminating thoughts, ideas from both of you. I love both of your perspectives. I get a lot of takeaways related to trust, communication. It's a lot about the people, and you can't really have that visibility that you had before as you go up the ladder, and that you need to think a lot about relationships, a lot about problem solving and making an impact, and that it's not easy. And one thing I'll interject as well is self-care. Sometimes yes, when you're busting your butt, right, that if you're getting burned out, self-care matters.
Totally.
Excellent. Well, with that, I thank you both, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you so much, David.
Thank you so much, everyone, David.